Good evening, everyone. My name is Adela Bass. I am the Director for People for Community Health Equity Director with People for Community Recovery. And we welcome you to the Hazel Johnson Environmental Justice Celebration and Conversation. Um, I wanted to just give you guys a few house rules. Everyone will be muted until, okay. Everyone will be muted until, please note that this webinar is recorded. All attendees will be muted during the presentation and during the Q&A at the end. You have the option box to unmute or mute or use the chat box. Please feel free to use the chat box to raise any questions or comments. I want to thank all of our sponsors. We have the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Chicago Frontlines Funding Initiative, the wonderful NRDC. We also have our environmental justice friends, which is the Sierra Club, the Illinois chapter, and the Shed Aquarium. I also want to thank our wonderful board members and anyone that's in attendance from the board. Now I'm going to pass it to my wonderful colleague, Kendrick Hall, with the opening remarks.
Thank you, Adela. Hi, everyone. I'm Kendrick Hall, lead environmental justice organizer at People for Community Recovery. We're so excited to have you all here with us today to celebrate Hazel Johnson, PCR's founder and the mother of the EJ movement. We use this as our yearly opportunity to reflect on the state of the EJ movement and hopefully find strategy and inspiration as we celebrate Hazel's legacy, reground in EJ values, and hear from some of our movement's greatest leaders. This year, we have a lot to celebrate. PCR was part of a historic settlement with HUD around Chicago's citing of toxic industries in Black and brown neighborhoods being a violation of our civil rights. We worked with the city of Chicago to develop the first ever cumulative impact assessment. Just yesterday, Mayor Johnson introduced the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance to help electrify new constructions after a year-long campaign with a wide coalition co-led by PCR. Our incredible organizers have educated and mobilized thousands of community members this year, helping folks connect to needed resources from vaccines and health information to solar panels and energy efficiency. We've secured critical support for our work to revitalize a historic building in the gardens and turn it into the Hazel Johnson Environmental Justice Institute. We have a lot to celebrate and still a long way to go to achieve environmental justice for everyone. We're excited for today's conversation with Dr. David Pello, who is a longtime EJ activist and academic. He has firsthand knowledge about the EJ struggles that PCR has been through over the years, and also expertise in a number of issues, such as the intersection of EJ and the prison industrial complex. So without further ado, let's get started. We're going to kick it off with a short video about Hazel.
Please give us 1 second to adjust the audio on the current video. Thank you for your patience.
Age of 41. Hazel later heard from Nate.
Did that change anything, y'all?
Yes.
I heard it. We heard it.
Okay, we do the practice session and then it still doesn't work, but thanks for your patience, y'all. Let's try this again. Thumbs up.
Hazel Johnson was born on January 25th, 1935, in New Orleans, Louisiana. She met her husband, John Johnson, in her late teens, and the newlyweds moved to Chicago in 1955. It's there she got involved with grassroots activism. She and John moved their family to Allgale Gardens in 1962, but their wonderful life took a turn in 1969 when John was diagnosed with lung cancer and died weeks later at the age of 41. Hazel later heard from neighbors about others experiencing cancer and lung issues like asthma, and of mothers in the neighborhood with high rates of miscarriages or delivering babies with birth defects. She discovered her community had the region's highest cancer rate and began to investigate environmental conditions surrounding the neighborhood. Armed with the knowledge of the health issue related to the environment and determined to act, she shifted focus to address environmental hazards surrounding her community, which she coined the Toxic Donut. In 1982, People for Community Recovery officially incorporated as a not-for-profit organization and waged the environmental justice war on multiple fronts. In 1991, Hazel spoke powerfully about her community's struggle with environmental racism at the first National People of Color Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. It's there she helped work to create the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice, a guidepost still used today. She emerged as a national leader and was christened the mother of environmental justice movement. In 1994, Hazel was invited to the White House to witness the signing of Executive Order 12898, federal action to address environmental justice in minority population and low-income population. Later, President Clinton honored PCI as one of the country's top 100 environmental groups. On January 12, 2011, Hazel died as a result of congestive heart failure. In 2015, the Illinois General Assembly designated 130th Street Hazel Johnson EJ Way to commemorate the legacy of the mother of environmental justice. Hazel's work continues today through People for Community Recovery, and her legacy lives on in the community-led environmental justice struggles across the country.
We want to thank you for that wonderful video about our founder, Mrs. Hazel Johnson. Now I'm going to continue with our program and introduce our speakers. I want you guys to welcome with me Dr. David Pillow. He is the Delson Chair and Distinguished Professor of the Environmental Studies and Director of the Global Environmental Justice Project at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he teaches his courses on social change, movements, environmental justice, human-animal conflicts, sustainability, and social inequities. His books include What is Critical Environmental Justice, Total Liberation, The Power and Promise of Animal Rights, and the Radical Earth Movement, The Slums of Aspens, Immigrants versus the Environment in America's Eden, Resisting Global Toxics with Transitional Movements for Environmental Justice, The Silicon Valley of Dreams, Environmental Justice, Immigrant Workers, and High-Tech Global Economy, and also The Garbage Wars, The Struggle of Environmental Justice in Chicago. His work has been reviewed, referenced, or quoted in the LA Times, the New York Times, NPR, the Chicago Tribune, the Denver Post, and the Mother Jones. He has served on the board of directors for the Community Environmental Council, the Global Action Research Center, Greenpeace USA, and the International Rivers and the Fund for Santa Barbara. We also have our other speaker, which is our wonderful Executive Director of PCR, Cheryl Johnson. Cheryl Johnson has served as the Executive Director. She is the daughter of the late Mrs. Hazel Johnson, who founded PCR and is known as the mother of environmental justice. Cheryl learned the fundamentals of the community organizing from her mother and carries on the work of PCR's mission to enhance the quality of life of residents living in the communities affected by pollution. A lifelong resident of Altgeld Gardens, Cheryl is a well-known, highly trusted community leader. She is a fierce advocate for economic equality and environmental community benefits for the Far South residents. Cheryl has played an integral role in the functioning and success of PCR's program administration since 1987. In 2001, she assumed the role of PCR's Executive Director. Under the leadership, PCR has continued to work for environmental justice and economic equity, expanding our outreach across the region. Since then, PCR has stopped discriminatory recruiting practices from the Ford Motor Company on the Far South Side, prevented hundreds of units in Altgeld Gardens from being torn down and displacing residents, pressured CHA to create a redevelopment plan that included the community input safe, secure environmental cleanup on the south side and stopped another landfill from being placed in our community. Cheryl's deep community connection and long-term vision for a thriving far south side and commitment to carrying her mother's legacy fuels her work today. Cheryl recently served on the Environmental Protection Agency's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the Illinois Environmental Justice Commission, and Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson's Transitional Environmental Justice Subcommittee. She's also a certified trainer for the International Chemical Works Union Health and Safety Council Coalition of the Black Trade Unionists. Cheryl currently serves as on the National Environmental Protection Act Subcommittee.
Wow.
Now we hear from our wonderful speakers. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. In the spirit, wishing my mother happy heavenly birthday. My mom would have been 89 years old today. And she would be so excited, for one, to see David on this call, Dr. David Pello, and also what we had finally accomplished in Chicago, David. You know, when you was here, you know, environmental justice was not even on the discussion table. And the struggle that we had to go through in order to fight for some of the industrial processes on the south side of Chicago. So from there, David, let's step back a little bit. From your perspective, what do you think about the origin of environmental justice movement during the time you was, you know, for one, I want you to give a little background how we met, but also give a perspective as to what was the environmental movement like back in the day when we first started and first met.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me say, first of all, it's an honor to be speaking with you today, Cheryl, my friend. I've known you since, September 1992. I'll talk a little bit about that. But you know, of course, I want to say it's an honor to be celebrating and lifting up the legacy of your mother, the great Hazel Johnson. So a big happy birthday to Hazel, the mother of the environmental justice movement. And, you know, like I said, y'all gave me my start. You know, I don't know what I'd be doing today if it hadn't been for PCR, for you and your mother and the staff, the wonderful staff at PCR. I remember, you know, Orrin Williams, who I think is on this call, on this webinar. That brother, he's been a mentor and a friend of mine ever since, you know, we met one day. But, you know, let me just say real quick, I remember, so I was in school at Northwestern, and I was in a class where we had to go out into the field, quote unquote, and find like a neighborhood or some organization that we would write a paper on. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I heard on WBEZ, local NPR station, it was maybe in the middle of the week, and they said, oh, this weekend is going to be a conference, a local version of the Rio Summit. So that was 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which of course y'all went to. I know Hazel was there. Maybe you were there too, down in Brazil. And y'all had a local version of it at DePaul University. And I went down there, and the first room I went into was an auditorium, and you were giving a presentation with Kevin Green, who at the time was at the Center for Neighborhood Technology. And I think after that, later on he went to Illinois EPA. And I was blown away. I said, man, y'all have got this figured out. This is what I should be doing. So I walked up to you, and I think I had like a notepad and a pen. And I said, hey, Ms. Johnson, would it be okay if I basically like did a report on you and your organization? And you said basically, you thought about it, and you said, well, we're gonna need to have some fairness, some equity, some exchange, some reciprocity. And so you want to take notes, you want to write a report, let's put you to work. You can be basically, you know, the admin person and supporting on that side. So taking minutes, helping out with grant proposals, being supported on the admin side. So I did that. You welcomed me into the fold like it was nothing. And I was like, wow. But I will have to say, that was more than I was counting on. I thought it was just going to be a class project, and I was gonna be like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, in and out, done. But you put me to work, and you taught me a real important lesson about respecting folks and not just rolling up into some community and being like, hey, I'm gonna just take some stuff for me and later for y'all, give me all your knowledge, all your insight, all your wisdom and experience. I'm gonna just get my grade from my class. So that was a very important lesson. I really appreciate that. And you brought me into the fold. And, at that time, just speaking about the movement, I mean, PCR was leading, no question about it. I mean, early days, my memory was a lot of what we were doing was really emphasizing the importance of race and racism as a factor in the environmental movement and environmental politics, environmental health, because the mainstream middle-class white environmental movement was just not paying attention to it. So people of color like yourself, right, and Hazel, y'all were really reframing and really redefining the environment, and there's that saying, right? We, in the EJ movement, we define the environment as those places where we live, where we work, where we learn, where we pray, where we work, all these things, just like this is where human beings are. It's not just out there, but it's everywhere and it affects everybody. So, but it was important because folks of color needed to assert themselves. And I remember, Dana Alston, who famously said, we speak for ourselves, right? And that was really important. And you talked about in the video, the first Environmental Justice Summit. And, Dr. Bullard, Bob Bullard, I know, and like Hazel, they were always very clear that this movement was diverse. It was multi-racial, multi-issue, multilingual, multinational. But as you saw from that photo in the video clip, I mean, it must be said, Black folks, African Americans, were among and remain among the most visible leaders. That photo of Bill Clinton signing executive order around that table, it was pretty much all Black leaders, including your mother, Hazel. And I also just want to say, I mean, the movement, of course, early on and still is, was led by women. And that's also important. And but let me end with this, just another couple of observations. Hazel was a visionary. You have been a visionary, promoting environmental justice around dealing with like waste sites and pollution. I remember, we were fighting against waste management and the blue bag system there, that early system of recycling that just was a disaster. That was their answer to our critique of how they had been polluting the community. But Hazel was a visionary. She came up with that idea of the Southeast Chicago Urban Environmental Initiative, which was really this comprehensive plan for transforming the region, into a healthy, life-giving, regenerative, equitable, sustainable, green, verdant community. And I hold that with me. And I always remember the Midwest Great Lakes Environmental Justice Network, which y'all set up. And I was playing a support role. Orrin Williams was in the mix there leading on that. So we were bold, scrappy, and not afraid. Certainly Hazel and Cheryl Johnson were not afraid to call out racism in the white environmental movement and at the US EPA, the Illinois EPA, but also, and I'll just end with this, more than willing to build and lead coalitions with folks across the racial spectrum. So y'all taught me a lot.
Yeah, and I can recall, when you was working with us, that Ford Motor Company was something else back then. We was trying to get established environmental justice, good neighbor dialogue.
Good neighbor agreement.
And they was agreement that we was trying to make with them, and they circumvented a lot of stuff, and people from the community went over there to protest because they didn't have jobs. Then they intercept PCR like we did this and we didn't have anything to do with them. It was everything to cut off this neighborhood dialogue that we was doing with David. And David, really, you really know about, and you've written about it, the garbage war. What do you remember so distinctly about publishing that book in regards to that is reflection of what the garbage war really looked like in the city of Chicago?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I just want to affirm and confirm everything you just said about Ford Motor Company. Woo, They just, yeah, they were never serious. At least when I was there, we were out making phone calls, coming over there. I remember me and Pat Jackson and you, I think we had a meeting with the, somebody management and maybe in the union, but it was clear. They had no intention of dealing with the pollution, the volatile organic compounds coming out of that place. And yeah, that was a big disappointment. And also we had successfully raised some grant money to do that work. So we were in good faith trying to get them to come along. And it's a long struggle. But yeah, in terms of the garbage wars, in that first book, that was my dissertation. And I owe that to you all. That came directly out of the work that I was doing, that y'all were doing with peace, and y'all were leading in Southeast Chicago and around the community. I'll never forget. We were in the office one time and some brothers came in and they said, we're working over here at Waste Management doing the blue bag program, and it's hell. It's hazardous, it's dangerous. There were reports, I remember Chicago Tribune covered it too. There were reports of dead bodies from, just coming down the sorting line, the materials recovery facility, the recycling facility. People were getting sprayed with like battery acid, medical waste, because it was just a garbage program. It wasn't a recycling program. It was just, let's throw everything into this mix and force these workers to pull out the recyclables, which anybody who knows anything about recycling work knows that that's completely nonsense, because it's just going to contaminate the recyclables. So that's why I got involved in that. I remember, Hazel, and you authorized me to just check in with these workers, and I started interviewing folks, and that's where my dissertation came in. And then, of course, I know, from PCR, and one of the staffers at Orrin Williams, he was working as part of that West Side Alliance for a Safe and Toxic-Free Environment, which I think PCR was allied with, fighting the Northwest incinerator, and finally shut that down. That thing was, the biggest waste incinerator in the northern hemisphere, the Western hemisphere, for many years. And that was a very successful campaign. And of course, before I showed up, I think it was back in 1987, Hazel had done a lockdown protest against chem waste management, which y'all later on shut down as well. I remember the details of that. 57 waste trucks y'all stopped from coming into the community in a matter of like 3 hours and got arrested and everything. I said, 57 hazardous waste trucks about to dump that level, that volume of hazardous waste on a Black community in just 3 hours. I mean, that was just criminal. That's genocide. It's unbelievable. So PCR put this issue on the map from day one. So garbage wars, that's not me. That came out of Hazel's work, out of your work, out of Orrin Williams' work, out of the staff's work. And I carry that with me to this day. So yes, yeah.
Yeah, you just brought back some memories when you talked about chemical waste management incinerator. This was an incinerator that burned PCB from anywhere around the country. Used to come to this site, and they had numerous of violations and even an explosion. What's so vivid to me during that period is that my mother Hazel and Marion Burns, I call them the Black and the white mothers of environmental justice. And we was in partnership with Greenpeace International, and they took them out to Michigan to train on how to do a demonstration. And when they came back to Chicago, they blocked the entrance on both sides of the chemical waste incinerator with trucks. And they was changed to the the cabinet of the truck. And they had on diapers. Yeah. And they was out there for hours and hours, and it baffled the police department because they didn't know how to get them loose, because they didn't want to hurt them with the channel locks too, because they was really wrapped in chain to this cabinet. And we hold up production, and they was out there like 6 or 7 hours until they decided to give in. But that was just so vivid during that time, where we had to really fall for them, because it's important to note about the chemical waste management. It was even to the point that we agreed with the state for them to hire an independent engineering firm to monitor operation of that. and that to hire community residents as overseers where they have access to come in and out the waste management incinerator at any day of the moment. So they was able to train like 4 residents that went in and out, and they continue to have record violation until the event they had another explosion. That's what really shut it down, and they sold the facility. So it's even dismantled. I mean, it's really not. It's they dismantled the incinerator, but the building structure is still the remnant of that whole movement is still there. That's owned by Waste Management. Wow, David, that that was some time. So in comparison to what you have. So let me ask you this one question though. So your dissertation wasn't going to be about EJ issues at first when you first went to Northwestern.
No, I didn't know what it was going to be about. I had no idea. It was all because of PCR. That's what
Oh
happened.
wow. Oh wow.
Yep, I had no plan. I had no plan.
Oh wow. Okay, I
Yep.
never knew that. I
Yeah.
never knew that, and I'm honored to know that we had an influence in you becoming the Dr. David Pello.
Amen.
Oh, congratulations to you and us.
Mhm.
So when you think about this term of the EJ movement,
Mhm.
it has been really positive, and this has really been a growth over 40 years. Because when we was doing this work, it was a fight in Chicago. I mean, even our elected officials, the people that work in City Hall, even on the state level,
Mhm.
they wasn't respecting this movement at all. But it's the persistence that not only we have, but the other folks that was fighting for the same thing, because a lot of times I want people to know that the Haywich community is rich, is east of Torrance Avenue, has
Mhm.
been a predominantly Polish community when we first started. And my mother was the first to ever cross that line to
Mhm.
go into that community and to work and to organize. And we organized to fight against the water reclamation district because they wanted to expand the sludge beds that was located on their Calumet site down here. And we came together and it went as far as 95th Street until we organized the Citizens United to Reclaim the Environment. It was called CURE. You remember that?
Mhm.
And the Cure, and it was a diverse group, and they was fighting.
Mhm.
But the 2 strongest people within that fight was it took me always is to see Marion Burns and Hazel Johnson doing
Mhm.
that thing. Because they was the oldest members of the coalition,
Mhm.
So, and it was you had Virginia Cap,
Yep.
you had a lot of other older women that was, I mean, feisty.
Mhm.
Didn't take no for an answer, and wasn't scared to go toe to toe. So, so it was very difficult in Chicago during the period when we first started. And to hear just about yesterday that the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Brandon, introduced the clean, affordable building ordinance. The
Mhm.
Cuban that we've been working, even though it was a complaint from her that we was able to win with her to make them come up with a cumulative impact assessment and all the other stuff that they got to do. But on the same token, we had Invert company who want to do mining on a facility.
Mhm.
So you see that even though we take these huge steps forward, it's always a couple steps that we have to take back because there's another issue that's been riding. I mean, invert is all got something to do with Ozinga. I don't know the right terms of it, but
Mhm.
Ozinga been trying to get a gasification facility in our area 10 years ago. We had to fight that. Now we coming up with having to fight right now today with mining in the industrial site. For what purpose? It's only going to create more environmental hazards in our community, and it's right across the street from Washington High School
Mhm.
and the neighborhood and a grocery
Mhm.
store,
Mhm.
and a grocery complex. So it's still like we still have to be the vanguard around environmental justice in our community. So, and most importantly, when I looked at your recent books, I haven't read them, I'm not gonna lie, but it's still clinging, I still have to read it, is when you connect environmental justice issues to the prison industrial complex. Give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just say, first of all, I'm so glad you just laid out some key details, which I never even knew about that chemical waste management action, that lockdown. And, you know, what you said, it just reminded me in some ways about the way people talked about Rosa Parks, right? Oh, she just got tired one day and decided she wasn't gonna, take no mess and just, okay, she gets arrested. But we know the true story behind that, where she was working with, Dr. King and other leaders of the civil rights movement and got training, and this whole thing was a setup on, so she could actually test the law and move that movement forward. I had no idea about the story you just told about Hazel getting that training, and how that, in terms of doing that lockdown. So I appreciate that. I also just want to say, you're absolutely right. Thank you for reminding me about folks like Marion Burns, may she rest in peace, and how Hazel and her really were guiding lights and really knew that they had to cross those racial lines. So, and like you said, we have to be eternally vigilant. Eternally vigilant. That whole saying, what is it? Victories are temporary and losses are permanent. I don't know if I believe that, but some historians have talked about what they call the long civil rights movement, right? Let's go back to the 1800s, even before 1700s, not just start in the 50s. And I think we could do the same with the EJ movement, right? And people talk about, I think we should talk about the long EJ movement and how, yeah, justice can be slow, but we got to get there, by hook or by crook, fake it till we make it. But on that question of prisons, yeah, let me just say, I learned this from folks who had done this long before me. So groups like Mothers from East LA, MELA, groups like Critical Resistance, folks who have been working in the abolitionist movement for a long time. The prison abolitionist movement have been hip to this issue of environmental justice as it impacts carceral facilities. So I'm just picking up where some of these folks had left off. But yeah, jails, prisons, immigrant detention centers, juvenile detention centers, these places, so many of them are located either smack dab next to, or in some cases on top of, hazardous waste sites, Superfund sites, flood zones, you name it. We have hurricanes and climate change driven extreme weather events in places like New York, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, California, everywhere in between. The last people somebody's going to think about evacuating are incarcerated folks. And numerous times people have, come near death experiences, water floods coming up to their necks. There was a case in Beaumont, Texas, the federal prison there, which is in Texas. It was a toxic soup when Hurricane Harvey hit back in the day, because all of these chemical waste facilities and petrochemical facilities had dumped all this waste in the community. And then you had like 36 inches of rain drop in just a matter of minutes, creating this massive flood. Loved ones were calling the prison saying, "What are y'all doing about my husband? What's going on there?" And they're like, "We got him on lockdown. We've turned off the water, turned off the electricity. We're not worried about it." So luckily they made it through there, but this is real. And on a positive side, what I would say is, one of the things I have learned from talking to folks who are on the inside, who are currently incarcerated, or folks who are formerly incarcerated, is these folks understand that hazardous waste is being generated in prisons, in workshops, that the environmental and occupational safety and health regulations that generally or should apply to people in the so-called free world, they don't apply in the prison. So we had cases out in Atwater Prison in California where folks who are incarcerated were doing electronic waste recycling. And recycling sounds good, but hey, we just talked about the waste management blue bag program and how hazardous that was. E-waste recycling is inherently hazardous. It's dangerous. So they were making prisoners do that mess. And we could go on and on. But on the positive side, since these folks have been rising up and boycotting, going on hunger strikes and calling out the authorities, I have come to realize, listening and learning from these folks, that many folks who are in prison are on the front lines of environmental justice struggles, and we should think of them as leaders in the environmental justice movement. So I'm pleased to hear that, and pleased to see that folks are connecting prison abolition with environmental justice, because that's really, really powerful.
Well, because one of the things that is unfortunate in our country is that the 14th Amendment say that if you're incarcerated, that's the only time that you could be treated as a slave.
Mhm.
You know, so if you treated like a slave, the lifestyle in prison is going to be substandard.
Mhm.
That stuff for folks. And you know, I really didn't really think about it until we had that brief conversation, is that, you know, lead issues probably still, asbestos still present,
Yep.
you know, and just less than a couple of weeks ago, there was an announcement that 200 people was just buried behind a prison, you
Mm.
know, and, you know, without even notifying the family that
Mm.
their loved ones had passed away. It just took the, you know, so that's an environmental harm. That's an environmental issue, because you know, you treated people wrong, you know.
Yeah.
And that's what we fight for in this whole arena about environmental justice, is try to fight the wrong so we can get it right, because
That's right.
it's inevitable. Because as my mother used to say, what, 30 something years ago, if we don't get our act together, Mother Nature's gonna show us, for one, you know what I mean, and you're gonna see a change in the weather pattern. She was talking about climate related issues back then. She
Mm.
just called it a change in the weather pattern. So when we think about these challenges that we constantly have to fight, what do you think is some of the biggest challenge that you may see that's happening now? And even some of the stuff that's not working today that you may think about, that is not, you know,
Mhm.
it's going to always be a struggle. I understand it.
Mhm.
You know, I understand, as you mentioned earlier, about the whole civil rights movement. It took 40 years for us to get the passage of the civil rights. The Voting Rights Act, it took decades to get. So, you know, and I've been working in this for 40 decades to get where we at today. So, you know, I get it, but our public, you know, we still have a challenge of getting the community up to speed,
Mhm.
and seeing that housing is an environmental issue, water quality is environmental issues, air quality is environmental, the lack of opportunity, being desert, is
Mhm.
on and on. And so this is what I always tell. This is my story, David. My mother created the toxic donut, right? I'm creating the umbrella of environmental issues, because each spokes is those issues I raised in the umbrella.
Mm.
If those spokes are broken, guess what? That umbrella is inoperable.
Mhm.
So we have to build and protect this umbrella to protect our lives. You know, and that's why I started to look at it as these spokes of things, and one cannot work without the other. And that's why we do so many different things. We have to do so many things in our grassroots organization,
Mhm.
because it's not single source, it's
Yep.
multi-source.
Mhm.
So back to the question. So what you think is working today, and what do we need to do to make things, I mean, what do we need to continue to do to make things better
Okay.
in this movement?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say a lot has worked. I mean, I think this movement has been very, very successful on many fronts. I mean, we can talk about, we've been talking about like chemical waste management, these firms, these companies that have been, assaulting our communities. Well, I mean, the EJ movement has been very successful at shutting down these incinerators and LULUs, locally unwanted land uses like that, shutting down landfills. But also, I think just more positively, like lifting up and centering the voices and experiences and the knowledge of people of color, of working class folks, immigrants, indigenous folks in the US and around the world who, you know, even though in some cases people may not have like the scientific studies, like certainly not back in the day, they have that experience. I live across the street, right, from an incinerator or from the county jail, and actually a mile from my house is the county jail, and right next to it is a waste transfer station. So that's an assault on a community on multiple levels. But we've seen successes, I think, you know, in the legal realm, people have been saying, well, we haven't been that successful there, but where we have been is what I would call like on a cultural change, changing the national and international understanding of what environmental justice is. The language of environmental justice is everywhere. It's in the media, it's in the politics, it's part of the culture. I mean, you know, I've got plenty to critique Joe Biden about, but I would say, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world to have a person in the White House who has adopted and embraced at least much of the language and vision of environmental justice and has attempted to incorporate it into policy making. You mentioned the NEJAC, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. You've been serving on that. There's the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. You know, we could talk about the work that the administration has been doing on the just transition to transition us away from fossil fuels. The EJ movement is also truly global today as well, with folks coordinating, you know, actions and campaigns across states and nations around the electronics industry, waste incinerators, fossil fuels, you name it. And speaking of fossil fuels, let's get real. Let's give credit where credit is due. The EJ movement, the environmental justice movement, is the reason why we have a climate justice movement. So that's another huge success. You know, in terms of what's working less, I mean, let's be real. I'm not going to say anything nobody doesn't know already. The electoral system, politics, is just inherently unstable. It's topsy-turvy. It's a roller coaster ride. We go from Bill Clinton to George Bush, then Obama to Trump, now Biden and possibly Trump again. So, I mean, for me, I think we need to figure out ways to build, you know, enduring, sustainable infrastructure that cannot just be simply dismantled by the next person who holds elected office. I mean, I don't want to get too deep and dark, but I would say, you know, some other challenges we're facing. The rise of fascism, the rise of white supremacy, white supremacists being honest about who they are and what they want, instead of hiding. You know, so I appreciate their honesty. I just don't appreciate them. Rising social inequality, economic and racial inequality. And let's be real. I mean, the climate crisis is for real. Also, and we need to talk about this, we are facing a massive mental health crisis on this planet, and particularly among our youth. And that can contribute, you know, not just to apathy, but to despair. And for me, that's worrisome. But we do have the tools to address these challenges, but we do need to be honest about them. So, yeah.
And that's what I really love about the whole environmental justice movement. Either we're going to continue to pollute or we're going to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
Those are only the two choices that we have. It's not that in between, that gray matter. That's where they make us confused at. Trying to play the middle side of. It's not either we're going to live in a healthy environment or we can continue to leave a legacy for our future children and their generations to deal with this mess. And so we set the groundwork. We have to build a framework. And we're getting to the structure now of it. So this fight, and I just heard someone just say that, like, living in, many people ask me right now today why I still live in Allgale Gardens. You know, I've been living out in Allgale in March. It would be 62 years. So I never lived anywhere else. And you always hear about that professionals leave their community, they don't come back, right? Hell, I ain't never left. I'm here. I'm trying to make my community the way that I used, not the way that I used to, but the structure, the economy of my community used to be sustainable. We had everything out here. Now we have nothing in my community. And I dedicate my life just like my mother dedicated, because I understand that it's all encompassing to the whole environmental justice movement. I'm happy to say you remember when you was with us, we was looking at that vacant school building
Yeah.
20 years ago. Today, you know, we almost at the point where we're going to be acquiring that building to make it the Hazel Johnson Institute. So it's not something that we just started thinking about that building. We always want, because we need a place where it's mostly impacted to come together, bring government, community, business together to work on solutions on how to improve the quality of life on the southeast side of Chicago. And these industries, that's because we carry the burdens of the most industry in the city of Chicago on the southeast side. But it's always a challenge because here we got somebody like Invert coming up that want to do mining. A few years ago, maybe less than 5 years ago, there was a landfill operator, Land and Lakes, who wanted to mine the landfill to see what exists in there. So we don't know what we're going to be agitating on under these grounds, and it's sensitive because there's a lot of a lot of dumping of chemicals in this area. And just like I tell people, like a lot of chemicals in my neighborhoods, like baby kids, they don't die, they multiply. You know, they don't die, they multiply. Because the farther you dig down, the higher the concentration of these toxins from the whole operation of the Pullman sewage farms that operated back in the 1860s back in this area. So the historical contamination, but there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to teach and learn how to remediate these contaminants over a long period of time, and to teach how we can create green, sustainable industries in our community, because we're not against industry. We just want green industry. We don't want no more brown fields. We don't want no more brown industries in our neighborhood. And they have to come in time with that, because it's inevitable. They're going to have to change for that. So what advice would you give to younger generation? Because that's the challenge, because I take environmental justice issue very personal, because it's personal. Because if I could sit in my house and be with my grandkids and dust is accumulated on the ground, we don't know what the contents of the contamination, that dust, was it the contents in that dust? And if they plant their hands in their mouth, we're making sick children. You know, older people have to make a choice as to if they're going to have installation in their house, for an example, or pay their bills or get their medicine. This ain't what Americans supposed to be about. So, and back to what I said, like I was saying, I love this neighborhood because that's why I ain't never left, for one. But in order to be a voice for that community, you have to live in the community that you represent. You know, and my community is not a green community. It's still brown until it becomes green. As long as I have breath, I'm going to be involved with my neighborhood. But I want to see the future generation, as you can see, that is on this panel, who also is on the team of PCI. It's not going to stop with me, my 63, soon to be 63-year-old. It's going to keep going. It's going to keep forward. And that's what my mother wanted to see, you know, because when she was going around the country and speaking to universities and stuff, they didn't even have an environmental curriculum. And they, you know, I remember the time when she was going up there to Columbia University in New York, just speaking to the law students there, to say, y'all need to have a department on environmental law. And Columbia was one of the first that built an environmental law curriculum. So when you think about, it's just so much that we have to do in order to wreck some of the environmental harms, because it's going to come back to hunt us as we are dealing with climate related issues as we speak today. So when David, I applaud you for I didn't know. I thought, being a sociologist, you could study anything. I never knew we was inspirational in you becoming not only a sociologist, but you teaching environmental sociology, every day. You still doing this work. So I'm glad to meet you at Roosevelt University, and I could pat my shoulders and say, hey, well, it's keep going, because as long as you informing and educating people, students, those are the future talent that we need in order to really resolve some of the environmental inequalities that we are experiencing, because all of us want to breathe clean air. All of us want to live in safety, healthy community. All of us want to drink healthy water. So it's beyond us that we have to make sure that the political process, not the politician, the process, we get heavily engaged to affect change. That's what, now, Chicago was the last in the regions of this country to jump on environmental issues. Now, we got ordinance in place. Cleanup is happening in a lot of folks, in a lot of areas. Industry are being sued for their ill practices. So if that's what it takes to affect change, then that's what we have to do. So I know I got more short time living than I had long time living, but I just know there's a baseline. There's going to continue to be people rising to challenge the system to make our life better and healthier. Otherwise, then we're not going to exist. And that's just the bottom line. So, it's just a lot that we can just talk about. So can you offer any kind of strategy that you would like to pass on to our next generation?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me just say amen to everything you just said. And, I really appreciate your point about how you have stayed rooted in your community. You never left, and you have fought for the health and the well-being and the flourishing of your neighbors, of your community. And that's amazing. More people should do that, right? I've moved
Let me
around so
interject
much.
to you. Let me tell you something about my
Okay.
neighborhood.
Let me hear it.
My neighborhood take care of me.
Okay.
Sometimes I can't even carry my purse.
Mm,
A lot of time people, one of the things I really want to try to do is demystify people in public houses. They say we lazy, we don't want to work, we're not, we probably don't have the economic collaboration, but we have social equity that will blow the roof off the house.
Oh, yeah.
Because my packages that I get at my house can still be at my front door when I get home.
Mm,
If my neighbor will call me, sure, well, I got your package. So when I look at things today, I look at things from a safety standpoint now. I have a car, and sometimes I leave my window down. Somebody come, Cheryl, your window's down on your car. And they said that if you wasn't going to we was going to put some paper, we was going to put some plastic to your car. Man, where you could get that from?
Yep.
And then lastly, but I don't like to tell nobody, but I'm not ashamed because my neighbor got my back. I still don't have to lock my door if I choose not to lock my door and leave and still come back and everything intact. Where can you go in America and do that?
Not many places.
And this is and this is what they call the project. No, this is just public housing. And just like I tell people, my house should not be no different than the White House, because that's public housing too. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but
Yes, I'm gonna get ready to chime in. We want to thank you guys for your wonderful, wonderful conversation. I don't want to cut you guys off, but we have some wonderful questions in the chat. We want to get chimed in on what the questions for you guys, and hopefully you can answer them. So we have a two-part question. How can environmental justice efforts act as a catalyst for Black liberation, wealth, building, and global solidarity? That's question one. Also, if applicable, how do you envision the world positively, I can't say that word, impacting Black communities on the west side of Chicago.
Cheryl, you want to jump on one of
You
them?
know what? Environmental issue has always been the catalyst that we just haven't recognized, because if let's take, for an example, PCR was one of the first environmental justice organizations to bring lead abatement training for workers, a technical training to the community. We was able to train over 200 participants in that training. 180, about 192, I'm sorry, got hired with contractors. That last 8 of them became contractors. So we was able to demonstrate to them that even though this is environmental lead hazards is in our community, there's a way to create economic opportunity as a result of this environmental lead hazards in our community. And it's also a career path, because once you become a worker, you become a supervisor, you become an inspector, and then once you get 3 to 4 classification in lead, you become a lead specialist. The unfortunate side of it is that we weren't able to sustain the program because of the misconceptions about people living in public housing. And when you have to be careful about who you partner with, who you sleep with. Because if you the weaker link, and they have a stronger connection, we have a history of our talent being stolen. So, but the most important thing is the consistency and the believing in this work, and to not just look at these problems in our community as a problem, but look at them as an opportunity to affect change and to train people how to do different aspect within the whole environmental realm, and this is reciprocating all around the world. It's not just limited to here, because when you look at kids in Africa who are taking tire scraps and making furniture out of it, it's evolving around what environmental opportunities and economic opportunities that exists with it. But it's a long street battle, because at the end of the day, if we're not involved when these environmental policies that come out that are bad for our community, and we don't come together collectively to affect change and get our elected officials to, or these policies changed, then, because there's a threat that all this stuff can be rescinded. So we always got to keep fighting from a political process aspect, and not just look at a politician, because we need somebody who has the same visions and want to provide the same opportunity to have a healthier America than what we used to have in the past, because technology, we're getting smarter every day. And we just got to make sure that the community that's been negatively impacted get the opportunity in the revitalization of their community, because that's where it's at. Everything is, so that's a loaded question, and it takes a whole lot of answer, but I'm gonna give David an opportunity to take a nap at it. I'm just a community person now. I'm not no expert in none of this, but I'm just telling you based on my own personal experience.
If you're a community person, that means you're an expert as far as I'm concerned. You taught me. I mean, I would say, it's an excellent question. And I would say environmental justice is Black liberation if it's happening in the Black community. And I would say ecological wealth and ecological health is economic wealth, and so certainly the basis of economic wealth. Look, I mean, the vision of environmental justice is a powerful and enduring idea. One, as I said, we know it merges civil rights and human rights and environmental protection. What good is the right to vote? If you think about that as Black liberation, I mean, which some people do, some people will contest that, but what good is the right to vote if you can't even breathe the air in your neighborhood without choking? What good is the right to vote if you can't drink the water from your kitchen sink without gagging because it's poisoned with lead? You know, and what good is the right to vote if you can't even walk in your neighborhood on the sidewalk because, you know, you got chemicals percolating up from the soil causing cancer and all of that. So Black health, Black wealth, Black well-being and wellness is the foundation of Black liberation. And you can't have that if you don't have environmental justice. But also environmental justice has to be about building democracy. And so I see that in cases like People for Community Recovery. I see that in places like Flint, Michigan, places like Jackson, Mississippi, right? Organizations, you know, Kali Akuna and them folks down there with Cooperation Jackson, they understand. And we're trying to do that here in my community, building a Green New Deal that works for everybody, but with particular focus on folks who have been marginalized. So understanding that you're not going to have a healthy economy if you don't have a healthy environment. So Black liberation is environmental justice and vice versa.
Okay, thank you guys so much for your wonderful answers. We have one more question. How do we ensure that regardless of who's in the White House, the EJ movement is still prioritized on a federal policy level? We'll go with you, Dr. David.
Sorry, I was muted. You know, I'm gonna answer that this way. I don't know how you will do that. So let me just say this. We are always more powerful when we're working with others. So my advice to folks, regardless of what's happening at the federal level, whatever's happening in that public housing community known as the White House complex, as Cheryl laid it out, join an organization. And if there's not an organization out there that's doing what you want to do, start an organization to achieve your aims. You don't need the federal government for that. My students do this every day. They saw the problem in our community of people creating waste and generating waste by throwing out clothes. And yet there were people who were unhoused and people who were unclothed, who needed shelter and needed clothes for their sustenance. So they started this thing called the Isla Vista Trading Post, basically like Salvation Army, but with like a green equity twist. You can come in there and get free clothes, and clothes that people have dropped off, and clothes that people have in many cases have made themselves. My students have also started something they call the Environmental Justice Alliance on campus, where they're putting the feet to the fire of the administration and trying to get this university to decarbonize. We also got this university to divest from fossil fuels. We got 800 oil wells that were going to be drilled by oil companies. They were going to drill this up in northern Santa Barbara County, kick these 3 oil companies out of the community who are going to do that. My students helped contribute to getting an oil drilling moratorium in Ventura County, just south of here. My students have also contributed mightily to creating a Green New Deal for our community. And one of the last thing I'll say is, look, federal government has shown time and time again, even if it's Democrats in office, and forget Republicans, they have limited resources and frankly, limited capacity to give a damn about us. And so one thing that I see happening in many communities all around the world is people doing what human beings have done since time immemorial, and that is helping each other out. What Cheryl was talking about with her neighbors, and people call it mutual aid, right? So in Texas, when the power outages happened during that winter storm of 2021, the government was missing in action. People were having to burn their clothes and burn furniture to stay warm and boiled snow to create water. What happened? Organizations came out the woodwork to provide people with water, clothing, energy, housing, medicine. We see this all over the world. We're going to have to keep doing that mutual aid, because these disasters are going to strike again, regardless of who's in the federal government. And most likely that government is not going to be there for us. We are all we got. So draw on the wisdom of our elders and the traditions of our communities of mutual aid. It goes back centuries. Go back to 1927, the Great Mississippi Flood, when the Red Cross was neglecting Black folks in droves, and Black folks were getting whipped and beaten and conscripted into enslavement to try to rebuild communities. The NAACP, W.B. Du Bois, and Black leaders said, don't give money to the Red Cross. give money to Black fraternal and sororal organizations, to Black churches that were doing work in the communities to lift people up. And they did, because nobody else was looking out for us. So I say to hell with the federal government. Focus on us, because we've all we got, and we've got the tools and the resources. That's my response.
And just to add to what David said, the movement never stopped because of the change of administration. You know, because we don't rely on federal government to do this work, you know. And in actuality, federal government has been part of the problem. And we're bringing the solutions to them, you know, from the ground up. So, you know, that's all I just wanted to add to what David said, because David speak volumes to what we need to do. But at the end of the day, we, you know, it's just got to keep going. It's just, this is our life we're talking about. Environmental justice is our life. So as long as we're breathing and have to breathe this, you know, poor air quality or live in land that is contaminated, because it's not just limited to where it's at. One piece of poison in my community affect the whole globe. And we have to change that for our future generation.
Amen.
All right. We want to thank you guys again, Dr. David Pello and Cheryl, for the wonderful dialogue. So we're going to now pass it to my other wonderful colleague, Mia, who will let you guys know more about how you guys can get involved and support our work.
Thank you, Adela. Hi, everyone. My name is Mia Barrios. I am People for Community Recovery's Policy and Outreach Associate, and I'm just here to kind of share some ways to get involved. So everyone here can actually help PCR by following us on our social medias. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and engaging with our content to help spread the word on our events. Along with this, you can learn more about PCR's amazing history with the podcast called Help This Garden Grow. For those of you who are local to Chicago, you can help amplify the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance by asking your older people to support it. CABO is an ordinance that would require new construction and major renovations in the city to be electric, since gas appliances pose risks to our health and environment. It's currently on the city council's agenda for discussion. So uplifting this now is very important, and to provide it with more momentum and show the city that people do want this. Additionally, you can also ask your older person to support the findings from the Cumulative Impact Assessment, or CIA, a multi-organization assessment that reassesses our knowledge that communities of color are disproportionately impacted by environmental pollution. This policy would rework zoning laws to prohibit further hazards from being added to overburdened communities. And this is important because just today, Alderman Peter Chico of the 10th Ward proposed an ordinance heading to the zoning committee that would allow mining operations in the city of Chicago on the southwest side at the Ozinga factory. This mining location is right across the street from a high school where air monitors have already documented some of the state's highest levels of toxic metals. More information about this is still to come, but if you'd like to take action, you can use the hashtag #NoMiningInChicago and tag your alders. But come springtime, we will once again be hosting our toxic tours. So if you're interested in booking a tour, you can go ahead and get that form on our website. And if you're feeling energized by the conversation today and would like to get involved as soon as possible, please consider attending our Building a Better Black Man versus Man, a mental health roundtable that will focus on ways men's mental health can be supported. This is by the HCEZ team, and the event will be on February 17th at 1 p.m. at the Altgeld Garden Library. And I can pass the mic to Courtney Hansen now to talk about how you can donate to PCR. And I'm going to stick some links in the chat on how to kind of like email or text your older people with some pre-filled out like links, so you don't have to type anything if you don't want to.
Thanks, Mia. Hi, everyone. My name's Courtney Hansen. I'm Deputy Director of People for Community Recovery. And I have the privilege tonight of just sharing some exciting news with you all that PCR has been invited to the White House next week to a meeting to share community priorities about federal investments here in Illinois, from historic policies like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Bill. So we're really excited. I mean, Cheryl already said, often the federal government is part of the problem. But we're going to be there to share how they can be part of the solution and really lift up our priorities so that we can not only influence federal policy implementation, but also bring back home resources to Chicago to make people's lives better right now. While we're there, we really want to maximize our time. And so we'll also be meeting with members of the Illinois congressional delegation to talk about support for our C building revitalization plan. As Cheryl mentioned, we've made some really exciting progress on the campaign this year in terms of getting community control of the building. And now we need to secure additional funding to do the retrofits to make sure that it's energy efficient and electrified and solarized and all the amazing things we can do to create a community hub and the Hazel Johnson Environmental Justice Institute. So we're really excited. Obviously, being invited to the White House is great for our exposure and our work, and it's an honor that the Biden administration invited us. But unfortunately, they didn't also send plane tickets or an invite to host us in the residence. So we're hoping that you all can help us out there by sharing a donation to support the trip. You can donate really easily on our website, pcrshy.org, as well as like send a check. We'll share more information in the follow-up, but really could use your support if you are as inspired as we are by the future that we're building together. Please send us a little bit of money. It really helps. And of course, if you're here, you know that supporting PCR can really ensure that our organization, Altgeld Gardens, the far south side of Chicago, and our entire city is really well represented in Washington as long as Cheryl's at the mic. So thank you again, and thank you to Dr. Pello and Cheryl for an amazing conversation. This event is always such a treat, and we are really glad to share it with our community. So with that, I'll pass it back to Cheryl, who's going to offer a couple concluding remarks.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody for taking out in this evening to listen to this wonderful conversation that I have with David, my fellow friend, that I just admire so much. But most important, we need to get this message out. The community, our community, we're going to DC, as she said, but we need to have the resources to be able to revitalize the C building. That's my target. That's my target for going up here, to see how I can bring back resources so we can revitalize this community, this building, with the hands of the people in the community. That is so important. David, I appreciate you to the utmost. I'm so happy that we had this opportunity to share our experience that we have doing this type of work, because if it wasn't for people like you that's in the academic world that can really move this needle a little bit farther than what we have been doing in our community, and bringing us the talent that PCR have as a result of a lot of this work that we have been doing, and from the support that we have from the academic community, because it's important that we all work together for this commonality that we have, is to have a better and healthy environment. So David, would you like to say anything in closing?
I'd just like to say, it's always an honor to be in conversation with you. And, this feels like a homecoming for me. And, just like I said, because this is where I got started with my EJ work. And I am so pleased to see how far you have come, how far People for Community Recovery has come. Congratulations on all the great work y'all are doing and all the successes. And I know you're going to step hard and get in people's faces, but also be diplomatic when you're in DC and bring home the bacon, as it were, because that's what you do best. You represent the community, and you know how to, stoop to conquer or kill people with kindness, whatever you got to do. But no, for real. People for Community Recovery always has a special place in my heart, and the city of Chicago is a beautiful place where, the environmental justice movement is thriving because of you all. So thank you so much. And it's wonderful to meet all the folks on the staff and the organization, and y'all are just an incredible team. And it just warms my heart to see this work continuing. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
All right, thank you, Dave. And I'd like to thank all the participants. And I heard you say Owen Williams. Oh, yes. Owen Williams. We go way back a long time. That's my big brother. And we're planning on coming to visit you soon in the summer too, Owen. I just want to say that also. So thank you. I'd like to thank my team. I'd like to thank all the participants for taking out this evening, and special homage to you, my brother, Dr. David Pello. Thank you.
Thank you.